first ever Liberal Democrat History Hustings. I'm William Wallace. I'm also the honorary president of the Liberal Democrat History Group, which is organizing this hustings in association with party headquarters. For those unfamiliar with it, the History Group exists to promote the discussion and research of the history of the Liberal Democrats and our predecessor parties, the Liberal Party and the SDP, and of political liberalism more broadly. I'll be asking Duncan Brack, editor of the Journal of Liberal History, to say a little more about the group's activities after our interviews today. During each of the party leadership elections since 1999, the Journal of Liberal History has published short pieces from all the candidates on their historical heroes, the liberal individuals whom they found inspiring and important in forming their political beliefs and views. We'll be doing that this year. The summer issue of the Journal of Liberal History, available in late July, will publish them. But we're also organizing this hustings to give the candidates a chance to talk to party members and supporters about their heroes. After their opening statement, I and my fellow interviewers will be asking them some follow-up questions. So let me introduce my two fellow panelists. Julie.
Hello, I'm Julie Smith. I'm a member of the House of Lords and reader in European politics at Cambridge University.
Tony.
Hello, I'm Tony Little. I'm chair of the Liberal Democrat History Group and joint editor of British Liberal Leaders, a former council group leader and former parliamentary candidate against John McDonnell.
Thank you. And now let's turn to our first leadership candidate, Leila Moran. Leila, tell us about your heroes.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. I think this is a wonderful initiative, and thank you for taking the time. Well, being asked to pick just one of a huge number of inspirational people across the world that have influenced me personally or professionally has been almost impossible, I have to say. I mean, from Charles Kennedy to Marie Curie, and more recently, Greta Thunberg, there's such a plethora of activists throughout the ages that have inspired movements, challenged the status quo, and affected change through their work. But I've tried, and I've whittled it down to two people who I would say have affected me in my work and personal life. And the first is Shirley Williams, who for me is just the most outstanding and inspirational role model, someone who I learned about before I even understood about the Liberal Democrats. She was once described as the first female prime minister, and she would have been a much better one than the women, in my view, that we actually had. She was a Labour MP for 15 years and a minister for most of that, and she was, of course, one of the Gang of Four who founded the Social Democratic Party in 1981, a year before I was born, and she was the first person elected to Parliament under the SDP label in the Crosby by-election in '82. So she served as president of the SDP throughout its lifetime, and in '87 she was one of the foremost campaigners for merger with the Liberal Party to form the Liberal Democrats, and later she was, of course, the leader of the Liberal Democrats in the House of Lords. But what inspires me about her the most was that throughout her political career, she stood for social justice and liberal values, and she persevered in an environment heavily dominated by men. In an interview in 1975, she mentioned that the great day will come when no one in television ever asks you about women in politics and when will we have got equality. And I have to say, we're not quite there yet, but she really was and is a pioneer. And in 2019, we saw the highest number of women elected to Parliament and the Houses of Parliament, and in our own parliamentary party, of course, we now have a majority of women, so I hope we have made some progress at least. But another reason I identify with her is because she was an amazing internationalist, and so am I. Her greatest and most consistent political involvement was over Europe, and in 1971 she was one of the 69 Labour MPs who voted against a three-line whip for Britain to join the EEC. And Labour's hostility to Europe, which you saw again under Jeremy Corbyn, was one of the main reasons why the SDP broke away. And it is her style, as much as her beliefs, that led me to nominate her as my first hero, because she was one of the very small number of politicians who ordinary voters addressed her by her first name. She's Shirley. She combines intellect with passion and personal warmth and kindness, and showed that all three together can change minds. And of all the members of the Gang of Four, she was the one that the Labour moderates who stayed behind most missed, and was the one who attracted new recruits to her new party. And I really take enormous inspiration from her work as one of the great liberal women as part of our history. Now, the second is rather different, and I've taken some liberty here because he is actually not a Liberal Democrat and is not a member of our party, but is a Liberal and was a Liberal, certainly in some of his beliefs, and it's Richard Feynman. Now, Richard Feynman was an American physicist whose lectures were one of the reasons I decided to study physics at university. In fact, here they are. I was bought them for my 16th birthday. They're rather dog-eared and I've got lots of notes in them. They really were one of the huge influences in what I went on to do before I was in politics. He pioneered the field of quantum computing and introduced the concept of nanotechnology. And in 1965, along with two others, he won the Nobel Prize. And as I say, he wasn't overtly political, but he was certainly liberal, and a very progressive one at that. He was not also without controversy. He was often seen as a bit of a maverick in his approach, and his humour could be cutting and sometimes frankly offensive. Indeed, he had some rather questionable views about women, which I would have been very happy to debate with him. That said, he is on the record as saying that women do indeed suffer prejudice and discrimination in physics. So perhaps he was persuadable in the end if he were here with us still. And he also worked on the Manhattan Project, again, very controversial, which was the development of the atomic bomb during World War II. But his real inspiration to me was the way that he encouraged me to view the world. And he famously said, I'm smart enough to know that I am dumb. And it was his appetite for knowledge, driven by an insatiable curiosity, that led him to be the success that he was. And he was known for his creativity and his humor, but also his ability to explain complex problems in a way that anyone could understand. And what I've taken from the learnings of Feynman's approach for me in my political career is that in an age where everyone strives for absolute certainty, I try and challenge my own assumptions about seeking opposing views, which helps with both creativity and grounded decision making. And I'm not afraid to try new approaches. And I believe actually politics in of itself is the art of taking a complex problem, explaining it in a genuinely engaging way to people who wouldn't ordinarily understand it, and getting them to engage with it. So both of these inspiring people in their different ways have shaped who I am today in my values. The boldness of Shirley Williams in standing up for what she believed in and winning people over through intellect, but also emotional intelligence, and the creative thinking and charisma of Richard Feynman. And these qualities, in my view, are missing from the party right now and are desperately needed for us to cut through the noise and win back the voters as we move forwards together. And that's what I believe I can offer.
Thank you. And thank you for introducing me to Richard Feynman. I should say I should have known about him. My son immediately pointed out he had the biography by James Gleick and one of his books on his bookshelves, so I have looked at them yesterday.
Very good.
But you do say he's a bit of a maverick and a bit of an intellectual. Now, having spoken to the Oxford West and Abingdon constituency party, I'm well aware that you have a very intellectual local party. And I sometimes joke that the only problem with all of our new members is they've all got 3 degrees. Do you think that's a particular problem for leading a party? What do you think one can learn from your liberal heroes about intellectual leadership or intellectual individualism or even intellectual quirkiness in Feynman's case that helps to manage a party like ours?
Well, I mean, first of all, I think both of them, well, Shirley obviously, but Feynman too, would have felt very at home at a Lib Dem conference where we openly debate, we openly challenge, where we seek to find, you know, the difference in things, and that makes us better decision makers. And actually, I think that is one of the things that they both have in common, is that they were unafraid to challenge. And we are a party, I mean, that has been the third force in the country, the fourth force in Parliament. You know, we are at a point where we need to be different, we need to be insurgent. And actually those kinds of approaches to leadership, I think, speak to me as what we now need to embrace. You know, let's embrace difference, let's embrace coming up with the new ideas. I remember Paddy in his day used to say our party's best when we're fizzing with ideas, and I don't think we should be afraid of that intellectualism. But I think also what both show is that it's one thing to just be an intellectual, but it's quite another to then take that and distill it in a way that really engages people. And both of them did that. And I think you have to have both. You have to be able to have the great ideas, but then really boil them down in a way that connects with people, so that you can not just tell them, but bring them towards you, towards the different way that you're approaching the world.
Thank you. Julie.
Thank you. I'm not going to ask directly about Richard Feynman, but I will ask about Shirley. So yeah. Like you, I was inspired by Shirley, but in a slightly different way. I grew up in Crosby, so my first political experience was campaigning in the Crosby by-election, age 12. But as you said, the SDP was created before you were born. So while Shirley was still a big figure in the party, her, in many ways, greatest days were passed by the time you became politically active. So what was it that really inspired you about Shirley, and what do you think is still relevant about her politics for today?
Yeah, well, actually, one of my earliest memories of British politics was, and I can't tell you how old I was. What I remember was my mother shouting at a screen that had Margaret Thatcher on it. Mm-hmm. And I must have been, you know, maybe 4, maybe 5, maybe 6, something like that. And then whenever Shirley would come on and talk about something, and, you know, she remained mm-hmm. and remains still a great force that gets a lot of media attention, where people will take up and sit mm-hmm. up and take notice of what she's saying. And it was basically my mother, who was not that political. I mean, she's Palestinian background. She actually became British because she married my father, but she really resonated with her. And I think it was that first impression from certainly my mother. But then later on, and I spent most of my childhood actually not being that engaged with British politics. We moved around a lot when I was younger. I was more interested actually in the international realm. And it wasn't until probably my 20s when I was really getting stuck into, you know, our country and the inequalities, and I was looking across the piece at who is there who I can have as a role model. And it naturally felt her. So I bought her biography and I read her work. And one of the stories that sticks with me was the fact that she had to stop politics for a while to look after her family. And I think for all women in politics, we're often asked these questions, you know, how are you going to mix both parts of your life? I mean, it's a slightly odd question because men do it too, but women get asked it very mm-hmm. often. And when I was entering politics, it was something that I really played with. You know, how am I going to be a good sister, mother, wife, whatever it is that I want to be as in the future, and also be a great politician? And I think Shirley did manage that, and is a role model in my personal life as a politician as well as my professional life. And in terms of, you know, what does she still have to, when I think we are in a funny way, it's a generation later, clearly, and yet we are in a funnily similar place. You know, we are as a party at a point where I think we do need renewal. And she took that bold step to change from the past in creating the SDP, but then recognized that that liberal approach was the right one for the country and founded our party. And I think as what I offer as leader at this time is a similar view, which is we are at the point where we are 6% in the polls. We've had a number of very difficult elections. We need a moment of renewal and of hope and of forward-looking, future-facing liberal politics. And that's what I stand for in this leadership election. I think we need to reprise that spirit.
Tony.
I'll try a question on Richard Feynman. I've read one of his books, but I don't know him well. But the impression I gained was that because he was so independently minded, he could be quite a difficult colleague. How do you manage such awkward people?
Yes, and I have to say, I mean, I think I probably take more from Shirley in the way I want to comport myself through politics than Feynman. I think he would have been a great dinner guest, but I'm not necessarily sure that he would have necessarily been a great political leader. But he was a leader in thought in what he did and the approach that he took. And you know, what he also did was he challenged people, and he challenged people to think differently, and he challenged them to, you know, thinking about the world in a completely different way. And I do think that that is what we are so good at Lib Dems, is thinking the impossible and then making it happen. And in terms of, yeah, how he would have been as a colleague, I mean, there are stories where he just wound everyone up, and we will have people like that in our party. There's no one, I'm sure, who doesn't have a friend who's a bit of a prankster and a bit of a joker. But I think one of the things that you can do with someone like that is appreciate them for what they are, but, you know, draw some boundaries perhaps when they go a little bit too far. And I think that's why I mentioned, I think I would have enjoyed a debate with him. I'm not sure we would have agreed on absolutely everything, but I would have loved to have had him around, or someone like him around, because he makes you think, and that surely is a good thing.
It's also said of Shirley that the characteristic attitude to meet her staff in was in floods of tears because of what she'd gotten to do, but not wanting to hear a word against her. I hope, in terms of learning from Shirley's habits, that the issue of how you work with a larger bunch of people is a difficult one, and Liberals are more difficult people to work with in many ways than those in other parties. Would you agree?
Well, I've not been in another party, so I'm not sure if that's true or not, to be fair. But yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that I've really valued in the whole of my life, and I was a teacher, I was a physics teacher after I finished my degree at Imperial, and was to bring out the best in people. And if you bring out the best in people, then by definition, they aren't all going to be the same. You know, we are going to disagree. You have to manage points of tension. And yes, I would expect that of our party. And in fact, you know, we often say, if you put 10 Lib Dems in a room, you get 11 opinions. I mean, it's part and parcel of our party to have that diversity of thought. But I would also hope that we demonstrate in how we approach the way that we debate, that it's okay to have different opinions. And at a time in our country where for a long time, for the last 3 years, it certainly felt very us and them. You know, Brexit divided us along these two tribes. And the art of disagreeing well, the art of respecting someone else for their differing point of view, I would love to think that that is something that we can demonstrate to the rest of the country through the way that we interact with each other as a party is a good thing and not a bad thing.
Thank you. Julie?
Having said I wasn't going to ask about Richard Feynman, and I'm not directly, but you mentioned the Manhattan Project. Where does that leave you in terms of the perennial debate in the party about nuclear weapons? Is it something you've thought about?
Oh, of course. And interestingly, in the context of Feynman and other physicists, I used to teach a module to my classes. So we'd get the 16-year-olds to debate the legacy of these physicists today in the context of politics. And on the one hand, you know, you've got these enormous crises that come, and actually coronavirus, you could argue, is one. During crises, you get enormous leaps forward in terms of technology and science, and often you don't really know at the time. Science is amoral. You don't know how it's going to be used. I mean, very famously, Einstein wrote to the President of the United States to say, please don't use my work in order to create this bomb, because it will cause such devastation. Yet the work itself is also, you know, the work that he did, Einstein, was one of the reasons why we've got GPS. You know, you can't put morals on science in that way. But the point around nuclear weapons, I mean, I want to live in a world that doesn't have them at all. I mean, actually, I agree with Einstein's assessment of where they were going to go. And the fact that Feynman and others were involved in the project, I mean, I think that's just what the great minds of the time were being asked to do as part of the effort. So my own view is that I would love to see the world actually start to disarm. And I think the party's approach, I'm a multilateralist and not a unilateralist. And my own view is that we should be stepping down our nuclear deterrent. We shouldn't be renewing Trident. There are other things that we should be spending that money on. But to get rid of it completely, I think would lose our standing on the geopolitical stage internationally. It would lose our seat potentially at the United Nations. We shouldn't be doing that straight away. And let's have that stepping down approach. But someone's got to start. And I don't see why this country couldn't have taken on what we'd put forward, in fact, in coalition as the alternative view.
Thank you.
Tony.
Over the last 30 years, Liberal Democrats leaders have lasted about 4 years in office. And over the last 300, prime ministers have lasted about 5 years.
Yeah.
How long would you plan to stay, and how would you know when to go?
Well, I mean, I think the knowing when to go is the art bit, isn't it? And I have to say, I'm not sure I will know from now when that moment will come. I would hope to be a leader for, you know, the medium to long term. I don't want this job just for a few years. I want to take us through at least the next election, but ideally 2, because one of the things that we know about Liberal leaders is it takes time, given the airtime that we get. And I am good at getting the media cut through. I think that is important for our party, but we know that you get that big spike during a general election. And that, in a sense, is your moment where people get to know you. So to aim for 2, so I'd like to aim for 9. That's my aim, and be that long-term leader, which is why my strategy that I'm trying to put forward in this leadership election is very mindful of the fact that, yes, we have primarily conservative facing seats in the next election, and we absolutely, just like Oxwab, have to win those back. But unless we take a broader liberal approach to this, then we also need to be ready to pivot to the next opportunity that will come in the election after that. And my view is that we shouldn't, as a party right now, be focusing just on the next election. We actually need to redefine what liberalism is for this modern age. And by doing that, we will be able to navigate the turns and the changes that we are going to see in this broad political landscape. Peter Kellner wrote an article in the New European a couple of days ago, where he pointed to the fact that all political parties are indeed going through a period of realignment. He mentioned the Labour Party and the Tory Party, but he also mentioned us and said that actually now is a point where we need to, as a party, recognise that there is a new political landscape and that we do need to show the country that we are modern and that we are responding and adapting to that new political landscape. And that's what I'm intent on doing. So yeah, five to 10 years, but as to when I go, we'll have to wait and see at that point. Everyone goes, you know, everyone goes at some stage. So that much I would accept, but I'm not sure as to when.
Shirley saw her great project, as it were, as rebuilding the centre-left, reshaping the centre-left. Do you see that as our task, or are there things we should learn from the difficulties the SDP had in setting out on this task, perhaps yet again?
And it is yet again. I mean, it does feel there is a parallel, I think, to an extent between there, but also at the beginning of Paddy's leadership, again, another parallel. It is a sense of rebuilding. And if there is one lesson that I think we just have to learn, is that as under first past the post, there are no freebies. You know, we saw the great highs under the Alliance, and we saw the great highs under Nick Clegg, and we saw the great highs under Stop Brexit. And every time that we as a party feel that we might be, you know, not squeezed out by the system, it doesn't happen. We always get squeezed out. And I think we do need to have a level of pragmatism about our targeting, even if, you know, at that moment will come and we may get back to, rather than 6, you know, 16 would be a good start, but 26 even better. Actually, let's be relentless about recognizing that we don't tend to win seats unless we've got that strong government base that underlies it, and we've got a strong campaigning force that underpins it. There is no such thing as a freebie for a Liberal, not anymore anyway.
Julie.
Are we going to move on to leadership questions more generally?
Yeah. Fine.
What would your vision for the United Kingdom be, and for a liberal Britain? How would you envisage our our message.
Yeah. Well, interestingly, so after the election, I became a bit obsessed with this question of what are we for? Because I was hearing it on doors of people saying, I don't know. I mean, they knew in my constituency what I was for, and they learned to trust me. But we kept hearing this in particularly places where I would go and help during the election. Who are you and why should I vote for you? So I went door knocking and I was asking people that question, what do you think of us? And they didn't really know. You know, they could describe the Tories, and they tended to describe them more on economic grounds, more about business, more about really wanting to look after the economy. They spoke about Labour and they spoke about public services and workers in the NHS. And when you then asked them about us, they were like, I don't really know. And so actually success for me at the next election would be if you knocked on a door and you asked people, what does it mean to be a Liberal Democrat? What is a Liberal Democrat? And I would hope what they would come back to us with is that this is a party that cares about freedom. You know, we are a party fundamentally that is about freedom and power to the individual and communities. And that's our USP. That's why we are bottom up. That's why we care about local government. We believe in the power of the individual, the empowered citizen. But we also recognize that in order for them to be powerful, they also need to be free from ignorance, poverty, and conformity. You know, they need to have strong education behind them so that they can make positive choices. And it also, I think, comes down to the way that we see the world. And we need to continue to maintain our internationalist values. It is the thing that attracted me to the party. In Shirley's history, it was what forged, you could argue, that merger and that party that she wanted to create. And I think now is the time that we need to fight this closing in of our country, and that open, tolerant, outward-looking Britain is the one that I want people to associate with us.
Tony, I think this probably must be our last question. You wanted to follow up on the leadership issue.
Yes, when we wrote British Liberal Leaders, we assessed the past leaders according to 3 key characteristics: communication and campaign skills, ability to formulate a vision, as you've just spoken about, and party management. How would you rate yourself on those?
Well, I'd hope in winning Oxwab from 10,000 behind to taking it to the best ever result in this seat's history with over 50% against the Tories, who put significant resource in against us. I hope with the way that I reach out across the media, both right and left, and get things done with them, that the first one, I would rate myself pretty highly. I think it is always for others to do that. For the party management side, actually my time in the party has been a one where I've tried to do things for other people in the party. I was co-chair of the Parliamentary Candidates Association, but more recently, when I was elected, I set up in 2019 a support group of first-time target seat PPCs, where I got in trainers, I got a donor together to help them to make the most of their candidacy so that we could support them throughout what was a very difficult process. And what was the second one again, Tony? Forgive me.
The second one was about the vision, but the third one was about
vision,
party
yes.
management.
And party management. So no, we've got a big job to do though on party management. I mean, change is what we are now about. The general election review made it clear that we need to change. And actually in my work outside of politics, particularly in my work as a teacher, but then also as part of a senior leadership team in a social enterprise for the 4 years before I was elected, I was in charge in those organizations of instituting change. And in fact, just before I was elected, I'd secured a job as a deputy head in a school who wanted to introduce a new curriculum. And I was going to help to navigate that with 100 teachers and 1,000 students. That is what I am good at, is taking a change process and driving it through. And you do it by being inclusive, you do it by being cooperative. So I'm not afraid of the party management challenges that lie ahead of us. And I have a track record of being able to do that in any organization that I've been part of.
Layla, thank you very much indeed. Let me just say, when I went to Cornell as a graduate student, the first seminar I went to was a debate led by Hans Bethe on the morality of nuclear weapons. So I was fascinated to come back in touch with some of that. Thank you very much indeed. Good luck with the rest of the campaign.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Goodbye, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And now we turn to Ed Davey. Ed, I think you're there. Yes?
Yeah, hi there.
Your panel is myself, Julia Smith, and Tony Little. I introduced them to others who will watch this at the beginning. I think you're familiar with all three of us.
Yes.
Would you like to tell us about your liberal hero?
Well, thank you, William. I think liberals don't tend to go over the top with heroes, but occasionally I can't help it. I think if you're involved in politics, sometimes when you hear about the noble deeds of liberals or read the speeches, you can't help get a bit misty-eyed. And you know, throughout history, we've got lots of people that we should celebrate. You know, from Lord George, Asquith, Beveridge, Shirley Williams. The way they have consistently championed vulnerable people, I think, has been critical, and it's what makes us liberals, I think. So it was been a hard choice, but the person I decided to go for was Paddy Ashdown. It's a bit more recent, I guess, but he's always been my liberal hero. It's one of the reasons I joined the party, and I still grieve for him. And I first met him when I became a member of the parliamentary staff back in 1989. And I was really surprised at how kind he was and how wonderfully he treated youngsters like me. You know, he had a bit of reputation for being brisk, even brusque, but actually it was a bit of a front. And back then I was perched in the whip's office, a little garret almost, and I was the party's senior economics advisor. And the way he just treated you, if you did something well, he would actually send you a handwritten note thanking you. And that just made so much difference to someone who was in their sort of early 20s and slightly starstruck by Paddy. And it wasn't just that, you know, whether you were eating or chatting or drinking, he'd come and join you at a conference. There was no sight to him at all. And I guess maybe it's a military background, classic dedicated officer with his troops, and you know, he just earned such loyalty and hard work because of the way he treated you. And you know, whether it's his jokes that he just repeated at the Glee Club at every conference, or his other stories, and there was something slightly magical about him. Remember a colleague of mine was rather startled to find a note on his desk from Paddy one morning, and it said, "Call me on my car phone at 5:57 a.m. And it wasn't quite the earliestness that was a surprise, but just the preciseness that startled, and that was classic Paddy. Another note that someone I remember called, because he used to write all these notes, he wrote for somebody, "Please remove David Steele's dead animal from my office." It was when he'd just taken the party leadership, and he was talking about a buffalo skin that David Steele had got from Chief Buthelezi. So always quite funny. Paddy could be a hard taskmaster, but fun. I'd come in because when I was the economics advisor, we were going through the recession of 89, 92. And so economics was always in the news. And I'd come in on a Monday morning, and quite often the phone would ring, and he'd bark down the line, "Edward, come to my office now, please." And when Paddy said please, it was basically it was a command. And so I go up to his room, and I find him reading some article from the Sunday papers, extolling some new economic idea or policy that he was determined that we should advocate that day. And I then spend about 30 minutes dissuading him from some totally crazy, ill thought through fantasy policy, but he would listen. And that was just a delight. I didn't always agree with him. When I was elected, partly thanks to Paddy, back in 1997, he was determined to cling on to the pre-election deal that he'd had with Tony Blair, which, you know, was very sensible. It helped tactical voting, and you know, I think sometimes close working relationships with Labour are very sensible. But the strategy that he'd agreed with Blair was designed for a balanced parliament, not for a Labour majority of 167. And you know, brilliant as Paddy was, I think it was beyond his skills to convince me that we could trust the Labour Party and that we could go ahead with that pre-election deal. And I'm afraid history proved us right. Blair and Prescott and others didn't do what they said. But I say this, watching Paddy work with Tony Blair close up as I did, it taught me a lot about how you do cooperation between centre-left parties, how you can make it work, how you don't need, in fact, you shouldn't go for some sort of formal pact. You know, they got some coordination at so many levels, coordination at PMQs, open channeled, which still kept the identity of the party, but it showed how opposition parties could work together and could somehow align policy priorities, which could send messages to their voters, massively catalyze tactical voting. And it was critical for the huge defeat of the Tories in '97, and I'd argue even in 2001 when Paddy wasn't the leader. So, you know, Paddy's done so much for the party. He was one of the people that got me over the line to join the party. I've been involved in environmental campaigning. I was environmentalist before I joined the Lib Dems, and it was people like Paddy and Simon Hughes who talked about the green agenda that really got me over the line. And you know, he made it a core part of our agenda, of our identity, when for some people it was still seen as peripheral, even cranky. But you know, he talked about it the whole time, and that was just amazing. And you know, I think that we need to go back to that. Of course, I was working for him as an economist. I'm an economist by training. I've got my degree in economics and postgraduate at night school at Birkbeck. And you know, what was quite unusual with Paddy, he was economically literate. He hadn't studied economics, but he got it. And he took a party that was a little too corporatist, in my view, in its thinking, and he reconnected the party with its liberal roots, astutely focusing on what policy meant for the individual, particularly on education. I mean, he emphasized John Stuart Mill's idea of the power of education to unlock human potential, and he made his ideas, they were always rooted in that liberal tradition. And I think without Paddy, we probably wouldn't have done so well, and I don't think we'd have got a branding that we got through education and environment. I mean, under Paddy, people knew what we stood for, and I think that was because he was obsessive. He used to say he'd sell his grandmother for a brand image for the party, and rather like him, I think we really need to focus on that going forward. It's what biggest mistake we've made in recent years. We've not focused on answering that question, so people automatically know who we are. Now, I think he also managed to reach out to people. I think he brought people into the Liberal Social Democratic tent. Like me, he was very anti-conservative. I fought the Tories all my life. He didn't like the Tories. And, you know, I think if he were alive now, he'd be egging us on to find a way within the progressive spectrum to cooperate to defeat Boris Johnson. That's what I want to do. And I think learning the lessons from what Paddy did in the 1990s is essential for us now. I think that's a history we need to learn from. And if elected as leader, I would want to build on Paddy's legacy. I miss him terribly. And I just wish more people knew what a most amazing leader he was.
Thank you. You've given his project a sort of B+, I think, because yes, you approved very strongly of it until after 1997, and then you think I understand you correctly, he pursued it a little too long. Tell me, what do you think we can now learn from that in terms of what a newly elected leader would do? Can we repeat the project, or are we a centre-left party, therefore we need to be close to Labour, or having been scorched by Labour on previous occasions, do we have to be more careful?
Well, I think we're a centre-left party. I mean, I know some people don't like left and right, but it's a shorthand. I'm a radical liberal, really, as was Paddy, and anti-establishment, wants to shake things up and and that sort of gritty liberal that he was, that's my style of liberalism. And in terms of where it relates to other parties, I just think it's instinctively closer to Labour than the Tories. Definitely, was for him, was for me. But every generation is different. Every political situation is different. Every political leader of the Labour Party are different. And these are early days for Keir Starmer. We don't know if he's really got control of the Labour Party. We don't know what ultimately his vision is. We don't really know if he will do some accommodation with momentum, which will make him impossible for him to do any arrangement with us. And by arrangement, I don't mean pact or deal. I mean some sort of understanding. So it's early days. But I think if we're going to defeat the Tories, which is my driving passion, we're going to have to try to reach out. I think, as Paddy found the early 90s, it's a long game. It's not like something you can actually say, this is how it's going to happen. It's going to happen this week. It's more a dance of seven veils. You've got to have the choreography. You've got to have the nuances and understand them. Now, I don't think it would help if we went to the left of the Labour Party. I don't think it would help if we didn't work enough on our own identity. I think whatever happens in the future, we've got to be stronger. We've got to be clear in what we believe, go back to those liberal principles that Paddy talked about so much, go back to being clear on our own identity. And if we do that, I think discussing with other progressive parties will be a lot easier. So the project, if you like, go back to your phrase, William, it evolves over time. And the project is different now, but in a funny sort of way, it could be easier. It could be easier for two big reasons. The first big reason is Labour needs us. They're a lot weaker than they were in the run up to 97. They've got few seats in Scotland now. They've got their red northern walls being breached. That means they're going to struggle to get a majority. They could get largest party. And do they want to work with us or do they want to work with the Scottish nationalists? I think they might work with both, but I think they prefer us. So that's a difference. And the second difference is this, which people haven't commented on. We've had a referendum on the alternative vote system. AV used to be where Labour electoral reformers would go. There's no way you go back to AV. So now the real test is, will the Labour Party embrace proportional representation for Westminster? And that is the prize. And certainly I, and if I was leading the party, would have that front and centre the whole time.
Thank you. Julie.
Thank you. Starting from that final point you made about AV, there was a referendum and it sank pretty significantly. Would part of your vision be about electoral reform, or is that going to be a separate issue that you'd be thinking about in terms of how we might work with Labour? But what would be the vision for the party that we would be understood by? What would be the identity?
Well, I don't think you make an identity for the electorate through electoral reform. I think you've got to talk to the electorate on issues that relate to their lives now. So you've got to talk about the economy and jobs and businesses, right? And I would want to link that with the environment and the climate change challenge, because I think the best way to recover from the mess we're in is to fast track the switch to a net zero carbon economy. So, but that could talk to voters where they're at. I want us to stand up for the vulnerable and to tackle poverty and to have a social justice agenda. That's where we traditionally liberals have. We've not talked about it enough in recent times. And in my leadership, we would focus in on that, whether it's housing, whether it's investment, education, whether it's reform of tax and benefits. And one thing I'm saying this election, which is a bit unusual, I don't think it's ever been said before, I want us to champion the caring agenda. Not just caring for the elderly, physical disabled, mentally ill, people who need care. I've been a carer all my life, actually, well, most of my life as a young carer, carer for my carer for my son. And, I see the weaknesses of the system. And I personally think there's a liberal caring agenda that if we talk about, it will resonate, particularly post-COVID. So I think if we're going to win and create a brand for the party, it's got to be around that sort of thing. Paddy did it around education, the environment. And I think absolutely they should be there with bringing the economy in it. And I think this caring side could be very powerful electorally. But behind that, we would still, as a big issue for us, have electoral reform. So it may not be in the shop window, but it's close. You'd see it. We talk about it. We think about it. And the thing about AV is, I'm glad in a way that's out the window. We can talk about what we really want to talk about. Single transferable vote PR. Yeah. And I think Labour are nearer to embracing this than they've ever been. They're not there yet. And it's part of our job before the election, at all levels of our interrelationship with the Labour Party, trying to move them towards that. Because it unlocks everything. It unlocks everything. So it still must be a key goal. And if I was to go back, relating it to Paddy, to the history of the party, the big mistake we made, the big mistake was this. There was a constitutional committee, you remember that, with Paddy and Blair after the 97 election, as we tried this Lib Library. And it did some good things. It got the European elections based on PR. That was good. It got one or two other things. What it could have done, what it should have done, is get STV PR at local government elections. If people had been voting STV PR with, preferential voting in council elections year in, year out, you wouldn't have seen the nonsense we saw of the AV election. Oh, people need a cross. People can't vote 1, 2, 3. All that rubbish. And it would have been the strategic step that would have led to STV PR at Westminster elections. So as I approach this issue, I'd like to think that we could persuade Labour to put in their manifesto a first Queen's speech commitment to legislate on STV PR without a referendum. That's pretty naive, probably. That would be the goal. Anything short of that, we need to sort of see where we can end up. But we need to be more strategic about winning for STV PR, because it is absolutely critical to reforming our country in a liberal way.
Tony.
You've spoken about how demanding Paddy was of his staff. How do you think your staff and colleagues would describe your management style?
Well, I'd like to think they'd say that I lead from the front. A bit like Paddy. I'm not going to compare myself to Paddy, but he led from the front, and I've always led from the front. When I was a parliamentary candidate back in 1995, no one thought we could win the seat. And so I just said, we're going to win the seat. And they all looked at me as I was a bit mad. We went out delivering leaflets. And all the way, ever since then, as a candidate, I've always done the worst job, on the idea that if I do it, then no one else can complain about doing it. So I always ask for the worst delivery round. We call it the delivery round from hell. Steep staircases, entry phones, that sort of stuff. And then if you do that, everyone mucks in, and everyone sees that you are not afraid of mucking in. And that's one part of the leadership style I think I've had. In terms of relations with the staff, I like to ensure that we have a bit of fun, if you're honest with you. The most successful campaigns are fun, and the winning campaigns are fun. And in '97, when we won by 56 votes, I made sure that we said to all our deliverers, when you're delivering your leaflets, I want you to smile. Everyone thought I was weird, but for me, it showed that we were confident, and it also really unnerved the Tories that we were smiling the whole time.
Paddy had the advantage after 1997 of having to manage a large parliamentary party, and it wasn't at all easy, with some very strong characters, and sometimes things fell out badly. As we all hope that we shall gain again a larger parliamentary party, how about managing colleagues? What do you learn from Paddy?
I think you need a good chief whip. I think you need a number of people who you trust, who can deliver messages that if you deliver, it's not good for long-term relationships. You have to have intermediaries. But equally, I think Paddy, certainly his early years, I mean, inevitably leaders, you know, I wouldn't say he was in a bunker, but you know what I mean? Particularly with the Lib Library stuff, he became a little more detached from the team. But in that early period, the fact that he would be so friendly and so fun. I mean, here's a story to make your hair stand on end. In those days, as a member of staff, I used to go to the gym, and you'd go to the sauna. And sometimes you go to the sauna and Paddy would be in the sauna. Now, going into a sauna when you're naked and your leader of the party is naked is a leveler. And whether I'd require compulsory sauna sitting, I'm not quite sure, but I do think socializing with people and making that important so you get to know each other properly, I really think that's important. That's one thing I've tried to encourage as acting leader and want to do even more if I was leader.
Thank you. Julie.
Thank you. You've actually answered a lot of the questions that we'd thought about in your initial presentation. I suppose one of the questions would be, how do you take advice? If you were party leader, would you be setting the agenda so far that it didn't matter what the Federal Policy Committee was saying, what others were saying, or would you seek to work with and be, as you said, you talked about having a leveler, would you be working with party bodies in that way?
I've been in the party long enough to know if any leader thinks they can tell the Liberal Democrats to go in one direction and they'll go, there must be stark staring mad. You know, that's one of the wonderful things about our party and democracy. And far from it, actually, as acting leader, I've tried to do the reverse. You may or may not know, but I went to the Federal Policy Committee in the early stages of COVID and said we needed to think about post-COVID. And I used then the phrase beverage 2, which is probably a little bit expansive, but you know, I don't think COVID is going to change quite a lot, and we need to be ready as a party thinking through the policy. So I went to the FPC and said that, and they said yes, 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 and they said let's set up a working group. And I said no, 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 that's not what we do. I want us to reach out to the members more, and this is a real moment to reach out to members more. And I asked them to go away and think, was there a way we could engage party members far more in policy debates than currently happens? And the model I had in my mind was citizens' assemblies, having members' assemblies, but in some way done through technology. And they responded really well. I'm delighted with the FPC's response. They've gone away, they've found a platform, it's called Policy Lab, and that's now being rolled out. And Policy Lab will enable not just, you know, this is what the policy working group says, what do you think, a sort of vertical discussion, but horizontal discussions that can be used in local parties, and to embrace and engage and involve more people. And I think that's the way to go. Now, I'm not saying that decides policy, but it brings up ideas. You know, we don't want same old, same old. We want refreshing ideas. We want new people to contribute. We want to harvest all the skills of people. And that would be my leadership style. I have clear views. I've been around policy making for the party for 30 plus years, and I've got, you know, lots of clear views. But politics changes, technology changes, challenges changes, and we need to bring in other people. I mean, take young people. In my experience, talking to young people in my constituency, their priorities change. So this year, if I go to Kingston University's Freshers' Fair, it will be my 25th year in succession at a Freshers' Fair. I'm a glutton for punishment. But you find in those talking to you know, people going to university that their issues change. And when I go around schools locally in Kingston, the two big issues from younger people at school and new graduates are housing, probably not surprising, and knife crime. And you know, as a party, we need to make sure we're talking to voters. And the idea that the leader has that is nonsense. We need to talk to voters, find out what their priorities are, whether it's the young people, whether it's people from Black and ethnic minority communities, and be in touch with them, and then listen to them, listen to what their priorities are, and then decide, well, what's the Liberal response to that? That's actually community politics at local and national level, listening to people and then playing back to them what our priorities are. And our hope hopefully, the priorities I've been talking about, green economy, fairer society, more caring society, that is picking up priorities. If you look at Ipsos Mori opinion polls, as I do, you'll see that some of those issues I've talked about appear to be top of voters' concerns. We want to keep doing that and keep refreshing it. And to be a dynamic, exciting party, you've got to engage members and engage the voters. And I'll end on this bit. My worry in recent years is we've been talking to ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
We've become a think tank. We've narrowcasted, not broadcast. And that's a really big mistake. The General Election Review, which I co-commissioned with Dorothy Thornell, makes it clear that's not the right way to go. And I worry that if the party, doesn't get this right and doesn't focus on the voters and then responds to them, we won't win again. And I'm determined we win, with the determination of a certain P. Ashdown, who was laser beam light focused on winning. And, I always have in my mind that striding off in the distance, with his slanting his eyes, looking into the distance, and he had his eye on the prize, and he wasn't buffeted, and he tried to make sure there was discipline in how we talked about things. Remember, he had the 5 E's, and he had cheese. He had all these acronyms and ideas to make sure people were just talking about the same things to get some discipline, and that's what we need. Because if we talk about everything, we talk about nothing. And
Tony, you edited Liberal Leadership, Liberal Leaders. Do you want to pursue that further?
Yes. In our book, British Liberal Leaders, we assess the party leaders historically according to 3 key characteristics: communication and campaign skills, ability to articulate a vision, and party management. Which do you think is the most important for us now, and how good a leader would you be on those criteria?
I think communication and campaigning is number 1. In the age of 24/7 media, social media, you've got to be able to communicate, and you've got to be, for the Liberal Democrats in particular, you've got to be campaigning and bring the campaign team machine on, because we tend to get squeezed out in the media. There's no magic wand you can wave to suddenly get media coverage. The best media coverage we get is when we start winning elections. So that's where campaign and communication come together. I like to think 30 years as a campaigner, the only Liberal Democrat MP in the history of our party to win a non-target seat at the general election. I think I've got a history of that. And, I've done all the major interviewers. I've been interviewed by Paxman and John Humphreys and Kathy Newman and Sophie Ridge and Nick Robinson and Andrew Neil, and I've given, I like to think, a good account for the party. So I think I'm strong in that area. The second area of articulating a vision, working with the party, because it's the party's vision, not just mine. I want to articulate that. I've stressed that several times in this discussion. I think we've failed to do that in recent times, and I want to make sure that, just like Paddy was, I would be focused on it. I'm not sure if I said this before. I'm sorry if I'm repeating myself. Paddy said he would sell his grandmother for a brand image for the party. It's a classic Paddyism. His grandmother was dead, so it was quite easy for him to say it. But that was the emphasis he gave on it. And that's what we need to make sure that the leaders focus on vision. Internal party management, it's very important. I'm not sure if it's just the leader's job, though. As the General Election Review said, there's been some lack of clarity in recent years of the job of the president, job of the chief executive, job of the leader. And while I need to, if I am the leader, I need to motivate and inspire, I think the management, you need others as well. And that's about working with them, the people who are responsible, to make sure that they're doing it, and they're doing it in a way that you're happy with.
I think we better come to an end there. We're running out of time. Just, if I may just add, one of the things I most admired about Paddy was an occasion when my 16-year-old son, late at night in Paddy's house, told him that when he had said something, it made him sound like David Owen. Paddy took it on the chin and talked back to him as if they were equals. Now that was personal management of a style that is absolutely superb. Thank you very much. Good luck with the campaign, and thank you for coming and joining the Liberal Democrat Hustings. Duncan.
Thanks very much, William. My name's Duncan Brack. I'm editor of the Journal of Liberal History. I'm just going to say a few words about the Liberal Democrat History Group for those of you who are unfamiliar. We were set up when this party was founded back in 1988 with the aim of promoting the discussion and research of the histories of the party and its predecessors, the great historical traditions we drew on from the Liberal Party, and obviously the much briefer political tradition of the SDP and of British political liberalism more broadly. And we do this in 4 ways. First, we publish the quarterly Journal of Liberal History. I've got a recent copy here, which you're not going to be able to quite see because of the background, never mind. That features articles, original research, biographies of leading and more obscure liberals, reports of our meetings, book reviews, and more. It's quarterly. The next issue will be out in late July, and it will feature the opening statements of our 2 candidates here. We organise regular discussion meetings and seminars. Like everyone else, we've gone online recently, so our next one will be the Fringe meeting at the Liberal Democrats Autumn Conference, and we're looking back at the 1945 election and what happened thereafter and what the Liberals brought to that campaign. We publish a range of books. Tony's mentioned British Liberal Leaders, which was a look at every Liberal leader since 1828 up until 2015 when we published it, and also a book called Peace, Reform and Liberation, which is the best single volume history of British liberalism available. And we publish a range of shorter booklets for those wanting a more introductory look at liberal history, including a brief, concise history of liberalism and the party, booklets on the history of liberal ideas and liberal thinkers, and one called Mothers of Liberty, Women Who Built British Liberalism. And we provide a range of research resources at our website, and the address is behind me on the screen. You can see more about us there. Please get in touch if you'd like to discuss anything more. So it just remains for me to thank William and Julie and Tony, our interviewers, and also Ed and Layla for being interviewed. And I bring to an end this first ever Liberal History Hustings.